The sun cast long shadows across the rolling dunes as Mohammed adjusted his traditional desert attire. His keen eyes caught an unusual shimmer in the darkening sky. Not the familiar twinkle of stars, but something entirely different. Years of navigating the desert had taught him to trust his instincts, and tonight, they screamed that something was amiss. The first sign came as a subtle vibration beneath his feet. The sand particles danced differently, creating patterns he had never witnessed in his 20 years of desert crossing. Above, the shimmer transformed into distinct shapes, metallic behemoths that reflected the last rays of the setting sun. In the nearby settlement, other observers emerged from their homes, drawn by the increasingly loud hum that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. Children pointed skyward, their eyes wide with wonder and fear, while elders whispered ancient prayers into the cooling evening air. The massive ships, for that was undoubtedly what they were, descended with precise formation. Their crystalline surfaces caught the desert light, creating prismatic displays that would have been beautiful if not for the mounting sense of dread they inspired. The lead vessel, easily the size of a small mountain, touched down first, sending ripples through the dunes that caused the sand to shift and flow like water. As the dust settled, the true scale of the arrival became apparent. 12 ships, each unique in design but sharing the same crystalline architecture, formed a perfect circle around what appeared to be their command vessel. Their surfaces pulsed with an inner light that grew stronger as the natural light faded. Mohammed watched from behind a dune as panels began to slide open along the ship's hulls. The sound of hydraulics and strange, high-pitched whines filled the air as ramps extended to touch the desert floor. The aliens had chosen their landing site well, or so they thought. This particular stretch of the Sahara appeared empty and lifeless to outsiders, but Mohammed knew better. The first aliens emerged cautiously, their environmental suits reflecting the last glimpse of sunlight. Their movements were precise and mechanical, suggesting either extreme caution or unfamiliarity with the terrain. They carried devices that emitted soft blue lights, scanning the surrounding area in systematic patterns. What the aliens failed to notice, but was immediately apparent to Mohammed's experienced eyes, was how their heavy equipment began to sink ever so slightly into the treacherous sand. Years of experience had taught desert dwellers which areas could support weight and which would swallow even the most carefully placed step. As night fell completely, the alien activity increased. More creatures emerged from their ships, setting up equipment that Mohammed recognized as survey gear, though far more advanced than anything he had seen before. Their confidence grew with each passing moment, evidenced by their increasingly bold movements away from their vessels. Mohammed silently retreated, moving with the practiced ease of someone who had made the desert their home. He needed to warn the others, but not just about the arrival of these beings. He needed to tell them about the fatal flaw he had observed in their supposed invaders' approach. These creatures, for all their advanced technology, treated the desert as empty space to be conquered. They hadn't yet learned what every child in his community knew. The desert was alive, and it demanded respect from those who wished to survive its embrace. As he made his way back to the hidden settlement, Mohammed could hear the distant sound of the aliens' machinery struggling against the sand. He smiled slightly, knowing that the desert had already begun its silent resistance. Their technological marvels meant nothing here without the generations of knowledge required to navigate this unforgiving landscape. The night wind picked up, carrying with it the first whispers of an approaching sandstorm. To Mohammed and his people, this was a familiar warning, one that would send them to shelter with practiced efficiency. He wondered how their uninvited guests would fare against one of the desert's most formidable challenges. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, but tonight, Mohammed carried with him the certainty that these invaders had made their first crucial mistake. They had chosen the desert as their staging ground, believing it to be the easiest target. They would soon learn why countless others throughout history had perished holding the same assumption. The morning sun rose mercilessly over the Sahara, bringing with it temperatures that would challenge even the most advanced technology. The crystalline surfaces of the alien vessels, which had gleamed so magnificently in the previous evening's light, now began to exhibit hairline fractures under the intense heat. Inside the command ship, the alien leadership faced their first crisis. Their environmental systems, designed to handle the cold vacuum of space and moderate planetary conditions, struggled against the extreme temperature fluctuations. The ship's biomechanical interfaces began showing signs of stress, their usually smooth operations becoming increasingly erratic. "Surface temperature exceeding safety parameters," announced one of the ship's operators, their translated voice carrying notes of concern. The massive view screens displayed readings that none of their training had prepared them for. The desert heat had already climbed past 40 degrees Celsius, and it was still early morning. The first major malfunction occurred when their primary scanning array attempted to compensate for the heat distortion. The crystalline focusing elements, essential for their advanced detection systems, began to warp. What should have been precise readings of the surrounding terrain instead returned confused images of heat mirages and shifting sand patterns. Outside, the survey teams discovered that their environmental suits, designed to protect against hostile atmospheres, were turning into miniature ovens. The cooling systems, overwhelmed by the intensity of the sun, began to fail one by one. The aliens found themselves retreating to their ships far earlier than planned, their carefully scheduled exploration curtailed by the unforgiving climate. A particularly ambitious scout unit, determined to press on despite the conditions, ventured further from the ships. They carried what they considered primitive backup equipment, believing it would serve where their advanced technology faltered. Their confidence lasted until they encountered their first salt flat. The crystalline components in their communication devices, already stressed by the heat, reacted catastrophically to the concentrated mineral deposits. Short circuits cascaded through their equipment, leaving them effectively blind and deaf to their command structure. The scout unit's leader made the decision to turn back, but the featureless landscape had become a maze of heat distortions and identical dunes. Meanwhile, hidden observers tracked their movements. Desert dwellers, who had lived in harmony with this harsh environment for generations, watched as the aliens struggled with conditions they handled as part of daily life. They saw how the invaders' footsteps betrayed their ignorance of sand consistency, how their movements wasted precious energy and moisture. The alien commander received increasingly concerning reports throughout the morning. Their biomechanical ships, marvels of engineering that had carried them across light years, were showing signs of systemic failure. The living components of their technology, susceptible to dehydration, began shutting down non-essential functions to preserve themselves. Attempts to establish a stable base perimeter proved equally challenging. Their standard force field generators, requiring precise crystalline matrices to function, developed microscopic cracks from the combination of heat stress and sand infiltration. The protective barriers flickered unreliably, creating gaps in their defense that grew larger with each passing hour. A junior technician made a critical discovery by midday. The sand itself was acting as an abrasive agent, working its way into every joint and seam of their equipment. What started as a minor irritant was quickly becoming a serious threat to their operational capability. The microscopic particles showed an uncanny ability to find their way into supposedly sealed systems. The alien leadership faced an uncomfortable realization. Their extensive planning, which had accounted for military resistance and technological countermeasures, had failed to consider the environment itself as a threat. The desert, seemingly empty and lifeless, was proving to be a more formidable opponent than any armed resistance. As the afternoon approached, bringing even higher temperatures, the command structure ordered an emergency assessment of their situation. Their ships, designed to be self-repairing, were unable to cope with the constant environmental assault. The living components of their technology, stressed beyond their limits, began exhibiting signs of significant deterioration. The desert dwellers, watching from their hidden vantage points, recognized the signs of impending failure. They had seen it before in others who underestimated the Sahara's power. The aliens' advanced technology, impressive as it was, meant little in an environment that had humbled empires throughout human history. The desert would not be conquered by those who didn't understand its nature. The alien commander stood before the strategic display, mandibles clicking in frustration as another sensor array failed. The holographic map of their landing zone flickered with increasing static, unable to maintain a stable image through the heat distortions. Reports of equipment failures continued to flood in, each one chipping away at their carefully constructed invasion plan. "Impossible," the commander muttered, studying the degrading readouts. Their civilization had conquered worlds far more technically advanced than this backwater planet, yet here they stood, confounded by simple particulate matter and heat. The commander had dismissed the initial warnings about environmental challenges, believing their superior technology would easily overcome any natural obstacles. Below deck, engineering teams worked frantically to address the cascade of system failures. The crystalline cores of their ships, normally maintained at precise temperatures, were developing stress patterns that threatened their structural integrity. Attempts to adapt their cooling systems proved futile as sand continued to infiltrate even their most carefully sealed compartments. The surveillance drones, their primary means of gathering intelligence, returned with corrupted data. The desert heat created thermal updrafts that played havoc with their gravity drives, while the endless sea of sand defied their pattern recognition algorithms. What appeared as empty terrain in one scan would shift dramatically in the next, making reliable mapping impossible. Meanwhile, unknown to the aliens, a network of human observers had already mapped their entire operation. Desert nomads, moving silently through ancient pathways between the dunes, passed information through traditional methods that required no technology to maintain. Their messages, carried by runners who could navigate the terrain blindfolded, painted a clear picture of the invaders' growing vulnerability. The commander's pride suffered its first serious blow when a scout team failed to return from a routine patrol. The rescue mission discovered their advanced transport half buried in a sand dune, its propulsion systems clogged beyond repair. The team itself had abandoned the vehicle, but their tracks disappeared into the wind-swept landscape, leaving no trace of their direction. They must have been captured by the natives, the commander concluded, unwilling to accept that highly trained soldiers could simply vanish into seemingly empty terrain. The truth was far simpler, yet beyond their understanding. The missing team had walked in circles until their water supply ran out, defeated by the desert's deceptive uniformity. In the ship's medical bay, the medical officer compiled a disturbing report. The entire crew showed signs of rapid dehydration despite their environmental suits' supposedly closed systems. The desert air, drier than anything in their experience, pulled moisture from their bodies faster than their equipment could compensate. Even their most resilient personnel began showing signs of strain. The commander ordered another survey of the landing zone, determined to establish a secure perimeter. The security teams deployed with their most sophisticated detection equipment, confident they could locate any hiding natives. Hour after hour passed as they searched, finding nothing but sand and more sand. Yet somehow, supply vehicles sent between ships kept reporting shadows at the edge of their vision, movements just beyond sensor range. A junior science officer finally voiced what others had begun to suspect. They were not dealing with a simple, harsh environment, but rather an ecosystem they fundamentally did not understand. The desert's apparent emptiness masked a complex web of life and death, visible only to those who knew its language. Their sensors, calibrated for detecting technology and large energy signatures, were blind to the subtle signs that humans had learned to read over millennia. The commander received the day's final status report with growing unease. Half their sensor arrays had failed, 3 scout teams were missing, and the ship's living components showed signs of severe stress. Worse, their attempts to adapt their technology to the conditions had actually accelerated its deterioration. Each solution they tried seemed to create 2 new problems. As night fell, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold that threatened their equipment in new ways, the commander faced an uncomfortable truth. They had gleaned virtually no useful intelligence about their landing zone, despite deploying their most advanced surveillance systems. Meanwhile, the humans they dismissed as primitive had likely gathered extensive information about their forces, all without revealing themselves. The desert wind carried whispers of movement, echoes of activity just beyond their perimeter. The commander ordered another sensor sweep, refusing to acknowledge that their mighty invasion force had been reduced to jumping at shadows, outmaneuvered by an enemy they couldn't even see. The morning brought new challenges as the alien scouts attempted to establish a secure perimeter around their vessels. Their hovercrafts, sophisticated machines designed for precision maneuvering, encountered the desert's first line of defense, the ever-shifting sand ripples that locals called singing dunes. As the vehicles moved across the terrain, their anti-gravity systems struggled to maintain stability. The sand beneath them wasn't the uniform surface their sensors depicted, but rather a complex layering of different densities and compositions. One moment, a hovercraft would glide smoothly. The next, it would suddenly sink as it crossed an invisible boundary between packed and loose sand. The alien technicians worked to adjust their equipment, failing to understand that the desert's surface was in constant motion. What appeared solid could become fluid in moments, and what seemed like firm ground often concealed pockets of powdery sand that swallowed anything that ventured onto them. Their scanners, designed to detect solid obstacles, proved useless against terrain that changed its nature from moment to moment. A particularly frustrating incident occurred when a heavily armed patrol unit found itself trapped in a bowl-shaped depression. Their sensors had shown a clear path, but as they proceeded, the vibration of their vehicles caused the surrounding sand to collapse inward. The more they struggled to free themselves, the deeper they sank, their advanced propulsion systems powerless against the simple physics of granular flow. Meanwhile, local observers continued their silent reconnaissance. They moved across the landscape like shadows, using the dunes themselves as cover. Generations of desert life had taught them to read the wind, to know which slopes would hold their weight and which would betray them. They watched as the aliens' mighty machines floundered in terrain that a child could navigate safely. The alien commander ordered a change in strategy, switching to lighter reconnaissance vehicles. These smaller craft seemed to fare better initially, until they encountered their first sandstorm. The fine particles penetrated their shielding, working their way into delicate machinery with devastating effect. What the aliens saw as a mere atmospheric disturbance was, in reality, a force that had shaped the desert for millennia. Local guides, leading small groups of military observers, demonstrated their mastery of the environment. They showed how to predict the desert's moods by watching the behavior of insects and birds, how to spot the subtle signs that distinguished stable ground from treacherous sand traps. This knowledge, passed down through countless generations, proved more valuable than any technological scanning system. The aliens' frustration mounted as their patrol routes became increasingly restricted. Each attempt to expand their controlled territory resulted in equipment failures or vehicles becoming stranded. The desert seemed to actively resist their presence, using its vast arsenal of environmental weapons, heat, sand, and wind, to systematically dismantle their technological advantages. A pivotal moment came when an alien security team spotted what they thought was movement on a distant dune. They pursued aggressively, their vehicles pushing to maximum speed. The target, a small group of desert nomads, appeared to be trapped against a steep sand wall. But as the aliens closed in, their quarry simply disappeared, seeming to melt into the dune itself. The security team, bewildered, discovered too late that they had been led into a maze of unstable sand formations. Their pursuit had taken them far from their support units, into terrain that bore little resemblance to their navigational data. The desert had changed around them, erasing familiar landmarks and creating new ones with each gust of wind. In their command center, the alien leaders watched with growing concern as their tactical display became increasingly uncertain. Large sections of their operational area appeared as blank zones, areas where their sensors could no longer provide reliable data. The desert was effectively blinding them, using its natural properties to create a fog of war more effective than any electronic countermeasures. As the day drew to a close, the aliens had effectively lost control of everything beyond immediate visual range of their ships. Their patrols stayed close to base, no longer trusting their equipment to guide them safely through the shifting landscape. The desert had become a living entity in their minds, an opponent that fought not with weapons or tactics, but with patience and immutable natural laws. The local observers, gathering at their hidden outposts, knew that the desert was merely beginning its demonstration of power. The real test would come with the night, when the temperature plummeted and the dunes began their ghostly songs, a symphony that had driven unprepared visitors mad throughout history. The desert night transformed into day with explosive speed, bringing new challenges for the alien invasion force. Their crystalline technology, having barely survived the freezing temperatures of darkness, now faced the merciless assault of the morning sun. The rapid temperature change caused microscopic fractures to spread through their equipment like spiderwebs. The alien technicians had worked through the night, attempting to modify their shields against the endless invasion of sand particles. They had succeeded in strengthening the barriers against larger grains, only to discover that the finest dust still penetrated their defenses. These microscopic particles proved more devastating than any conventional weapon, working their way into the most sensitive components of their advanced machinery. A massive dust storm appeared on the horizon, its approach monitored by both invaders and locals alike. The desert dwellers immediately began their practiced preparations, securing their belongings and seeking shelter in time-tested refuges. The aliens, however, maintained their positions, confident in their technological superiority. The storm struck with the force of a natural battering ram. Visibility dropped to zero as sand and dust filled the air, turning day into twilight. The aliens' sophisticated sensor arrays, already compromised by environmental damage, failed completely under the barrage. Their detection systems, designed to penetrate the densest atmospheric conditions, proved useless against the simply physical reality of billions of sand particles in the air. Inside the command ship, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The storm found every weakness in their sealed environment, driven by winds that could strip paint from metal. The ship's living components, already stressed by dehydration, began shutting down non-essential systems in a desperate attempt to survive. Emergency alerts sounded throughout the vessel as environmental controls fluctuated wildly. The alien commander watched in disbelief as their defensive perimeter effectively disappeared. The storm had rendered their advanced surveillance systems blind, leaving them vulnerable to attack. Yet the true threat came not from human forces, but from the storm itself. Each passing minute caused more damage to their equipment than enemy fire ever could. Local guides, leading small teams of Earth's military observers, used the storm as cover to move even closer to the alien positions. They navigated through the maelstrom with practiced ease, using techniques refined over centuries. While the aliens huddled in their failing shelters, these teams gathered crucial intelligence about the invaders' vulnerabilities. The storm's intensity increased as it passed over the alien landing zone. Their ships, massive as they were, creaked and groaned under the assault. The crystalline structures that gave them their elegant appearance began to resonate with the wind, producing eerie harmonics that set teeth on edge. What had seemed like impregnable fortresses now felt fragile and exposed. Emergency repairs became impossible as the storm raged on. Any exposed equipment quickly became clogged with sand, and replacement components failed almost immediately upon installation. The aliens discovered that their modular repair systems, so effective in space, were worse than useless in an environment that could strip exposed metal bare in minutes. A particularly violent gust of wind tore loose one of their sensor arrays, sending it tumbling across the dunes like a piece of paper. The aliens could only watch helplessly as millions of credits worth of irreplaceable equipment vanished into the storm. Their attempts to track its location proved futile, as the wind quickly buried it beneath meters of sand. The desert dwellers, safely sheltered in their traditional refuges, shared knowing looks as the storm continued its work. They had witnessed this scene before, as others had come to the desert with their mighty machines and unshakable confidence. The desert had greeted them all the same way, with a demonstration of power that no technology could match. As the storm began to subside, the true extent of the damage became apparent. The aliens' once gleaming ships were now coated in a thick layer of dust that their self-cleaning systems couldn't handle. More critically, their defensive shields had been compromised beyond repair, leaving them vulnerable to the next inevitable storm. The alien commander received damage reports with growing dread. Their mighty invasion force, capable of crossing interstellar distances, had been effectively neutralized by nothing more than wind and sand. The desert had deployed its defensive system with devastating efficiency, using the most basic elements of nature to defeat the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Local observers, emerging from their shelters, noted with satisfaction the changed appearance of the alien physician. The invaders' arrogant display of power had been replaced by a scramble for survival, their confidence broken by their first real encounter with the desert's true strength. A young desert guide named Hassan approached the hidden military command post as the sun climbed toward its zenith. His weathered face carried the kind of wisdom that came not from books or technology, but from a lifetime of reading the desert's countless subtle signs. The military commanders gathered around him, already learning to respect the knowledge that had been passed down through generations. "Watch the scarab beetles," Hassan explained, pointing to several of the insects moving across the sand. "When they climb to the top of the dunes and stay there, a hot wind is coming." The military observers noted how the beetles positioned themselves, realizing that nature had provided early warning systems far more reliable than their electronic sensors. Inside the alien vessels, the situation grew increasingly desperate. Their biomechanical systems, designed to be self-repairing, struggled to cope with the constant environmental assault. The living components of their ships began showing signs of severe stress, their usual regenerative capabilities overwhelmed by the extreme conditions. Hassan led a small group of military strategists to a vantage point overlooking the alien landing zone. He demonstrated how to move across the dunes without creating detectable patterns, using techniques that desert dwellers had perfected over centuries. The aliens' surveillance systems, already compromised by environmental damage, proved completely blind to their presence. The temperature continued to rise, reaching levels that challenged even the desert-adapted humans. For the aliens, it was approaching a critical threshold. Their cooling systems, designed for the cold of space and moderate planetary conditions, began failing systematically. The crystalline cores of their ships, requiring precise temperature control, started developing dangerous stress patterns. "The desert speaks to those who know how to listen," Hassan shared, pointing out how the wind had shaped the dunes around the alien ships. "These patterns tell us where the sand is strongest and weakest." The military observers watched in fascination as he explained how the desert's natural formations could be used to channel and control movement. A breakthrough came when Hassan demonstrated the concept of thermal dynamics in the desert. He showed how the temperature difference between sunlight and shade could create powerful convection currents, which in turn affected the aliens' sensitive equipment. This knowledge, combined with modern military strategy, began forming the foundation of an effective defense plan. The alien commander received increasingly alarming reports about their ship's deteriorating condition. The living components of their technology, unable to adapt to the extreme environment, began shutting down critical systems. Their attempts to modify their equipment for desert conditions only seemed to accelerate the degradation process. Hassan's expertise proved invaluable as he explained the desert's daily cycles. He showed how the extreme temperature variations between day and night could be used tactically, pointing out the precise times when the aliens' technology would be most vulnerable. The military strategists began timing their observations to coincide with these natural windows of opportunity. The aliens attempted to compensate by rotating their active systems, trying to prevent any single component from experiencing prolonged exposure. However, this strategy quickly proved futile as the desert's relentless assault continued to degrade their equipment faster than they could adapt. Local knowledge transformed into strategic advantage as Hassan shared centuries-old techniques for predicting sandstorms. He taught the military observers how to read the subtle changes in wind patterns and sky color that preceded these natural phenomena. This information would prove crucial in coordinating future operations. The alien ships, once gleaming examples of advanced technology, now stood tarnished and weathered under the desert sun. Their surfaces, designed to be self-cleaning, had become permanently etched by countless sand particles. The damage was more than cosmetic. Their entire operational capability had been compromised. Hassan's final lesson of the day focused on the desert's water systems. He revealed how underground aquifers and hidden springs created patches of relatively stable ground, while other areas remained treacherously loose. This knowledge, refined over generations, would prove essential in planning ground operations. As evening approached, the military commanders had gained a new appreciation for traditional desert wisdom. They realized that victory would come not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through understanding and working with the desert's natural forces. Hassan's teachings had bridged the gap between ancient knowledge and modern warfare, creating a powerful new defensive strategy. The aliens, meanwhile, faced the growing realization that their technological superiority meant little in an environment that had been challenging civilizations since the dawn of time. Their mighty invasion force had been humbled not by advanced weapons, but by the simple, implacable forces of nature that desert dwellers had learned to respect and understand centuries ago. The alien fleet's mighty engines groaned under the relentless assault of microscopic sand particles. Their crystalline cores, once pristine and perfectly aligned, now displayed an intricate web of fractures. The damage had progressed beyond their most pessimistic projections, reaching critical levels that threatened their entire operational capability. Inside the command vessel, emergency alarms blared with increasing frequency. The living components of their ships, essential for navigation and basic functions, showed signs of severe systemic failure. These biomechanical marvels, capable of regenerating damage in normal conditions, had been pushed far beyond their design limitations by the harsh desert environment. A particularly troubling development emerged in their primary propulsion systems. The precise crystalline matrices required for faster-than-light travel had become compromised by sand infiltration. Even if they managed to reach orbit, interstellar travel would be impossible without extensive repairs. The realization hit hard. They were effectively stranded on this hostile world. The alien technicians worked frantically to save what equipment they could, but each attempt at repair seemed to cause new problems. Their advanced tools, designed for sterile spacecraft environments, proved worse than useless in the sand-filled air. Simple maintenance tasks became nearly impossible as fine dust worked its way into every seal and connection. Meanwhile, the human forces had begun implementing their strategy, guided by generations of desert knowledge. They didn't need to attack directly. The desert itself had become their most powerful weapon. They simply waited, watching as the aliens' sophisticated technology crumbled under natural forces they couldn't hope to control. The commander's display screen flickered continuously now, its crystalline display elements deteriorating under the constant exposure to heat and sand. The tactical overview, once a marvel of holographic precision, had become unreliable and glitch-ridden. Entire sections of their sensor network had gone dark, leaving them effectively blind to their surroundings. A cascade failure began in one of the support ships, spreading quickly through its interconnected systems. The living components, pushed beyond endurance, started shutting down non-essential functions in a desperate bid for survival. The ship's crew watched helplessly as their advanced technology regressed to its most basic operational level. The desert winds picked up again, carrying with them a fresh assault of sand particles. These tiny grains, seemingly harmless individually, had proven to be more devastating than any conventional weapon. They worked their way into the ship's most sensitive components, causing damage that their self-repair systems couldn't handle. External communication became increasingly difficult as their transmission equipment succumbed to the harsh conditions. The crystalline arrays that normally allowed instantaneous communication across light years had become so degraded that they could barely maintain contact between ships. The invasion force found itself increasingly isolated, cut off from both their home world and each other. The alien medical bay reported a sharp increase in crew casualties. Their environmental suits, designed to protect against hostile atmospheres, had proven inadequate against the combination of extreme heat and perpetual dust. The medical officers watched with growing concern as more crew members succumbed to heat exhaustion and respiratory problems. In a desperate bid to preserve their remaining functional equipment, the commander ordered all non-essential systems shut down. This decision came too late. The damage had already progressed beyond the point of no return. Their mighty vessels, once capable of destroying entire planetary defense systems, now struggled to maintain basic life support. The human observers maintained their distance, unnecessary now as active participants in the aliens' defeat. They had learned long ago that the desert required no assistance in dealing with those who failed to respect its power. Their role had become that of witnesses to a natural process as old as the desert itself. Ship after ship reported critical failures in their core systems. The crystalline technology that had seemed so superior now proved to be their greatest weakness. Unable to adapt to the extreme conditions, their equipment continued to degrade despite their best efforts at preservation and repair. The commander stood at the main viewport, watching as another support vessel's lights flickered and died. The once proud ship now stood dark and silent, its crew evacuating to other vessels that would soon face the same fate. Their invasion force, which had seemed invincible upon arrival, had been reduced to a collection of failing machinery. As night approached, bringing with it another cycle of extreme temperature change, the alien fleet faced an undeniable truth. They had been defeated not by human weapons or tactics, but by the simple, relentless forces of nature. Their technology, advanced as it was, had proven no match for an environment that had been challenging life forms since long before humans walked the earth. The alien commander stood before the assembled fleet leadership, their proud posture now replaced by one of resignation. The holographic displays around them flickered weakly, struggling to maintain coherence in the sand-filled air. The decision they had come to was unprecedented in their civilization's history, a full retreat in the face of environmental forces rather than enemy action. Reports from their remaining functional sensors painted a grim picture. 8 of their 12 support ships had lost primary power, their crystalline cores damaged beyond repair. The surviving vessels operated at minimal capacity, barely maintaining life support for their combined crews. Their mighty invasion fleet had been reduced to a collection of crippled hulks in less than a planetary rotation cycle. Outside, the desert wind carried the sound of failing machinery. The once smooth hum of their advanced technology had been replaced by labored grinding as sand continued its relentless invasion of every system. Their remaining operational ships groaned under the strain, their living components struggling to maintain basic functions in the hostile environment. The human military observers, guided by their desert allies, watched from safe distances as the aliens began their evacuation procedures. They had never fired a shot, never launched an attack, yet they had witnessed one of the most decisive victories in Earth's history. The desert had proven to be humanity's most effective defensive weapon. Inside the command vessel, the alien engineers delivered their final assessment. The damage to their crystalline technology was irreversible without major repairs in a controlled environment. Even if they managed to reach orbit, their faster-than-light capabilities had been compromised beyond their ability to repair. They would need to signal for rescue from their homeworld. The desert dwellers shared knowing looks as they observed the aliens' frantic activity. They had seen this scene play out before, though with less advanced invaders. The desert had taught them long ago that true power lay not in technology or weapons, but in understanding and respecting the natural forces that shaped their world. As the evacuation commenced, the aliens witnessed something that challenged their fundamental understanding of advancement. They watched as humans moved effortlessly through the terrain that had defeated their superior technology, using nothing more sophisticated than traditional knowledge passed down through generations. The commander received one final report that sealed their defeat. The crystalline communication array, their last link to their home world, had finally succumbed to the endless assault of sand and heat. They were now truly stranded, their mighty technology rendered useless by the simplest of natural elements. Local guides led military observers to safe observation points as the aliens began powering up their remaining functional ships. The desert winds picked up, as if offering a final demonstration of power. Swirling clouds of sand obscured the vessels, the particles reflecting the sun's light to create an otherworldly display. The alien crew members, abandoning their damaged ships, crowded onto the few vessels still capable of spaceflight. They left behind not just advanced technology, but also their presumptions about the nature of power and progress. The desert had taught them a harsh lesson about the difference between technological superiority and true adaptation. Human settlements across the region reported the sight of massive ships struggling to rise through the atmosphere. Their once graceful ascent had become a labored climb as damaged engines fought against gravity and sand-clogged systems. Several vessels required multiple attempts before successfully breaking free of the desert's grasp. The desert dwellers watched the departure with quiet satisfaction. They knew that the aliens would carry with them a new understanding, that true advancement came not from conquering nature, but from learning to live in harmony with it. Their sophisticated technology had proved no match for knowledge gained through centuries of desert life. As the last ship disappeared into the sky, the desert winds began erasing all evidence of their presence. Dunes shifted to cover abandoned equipment, and sand filled the impressions left by their vessels. Within days, there would be no sign that an advanced alien civilization had ever attempted to establish a foothold in this unforgiving terrain. The military strategists, gathered for their final briefing with the desert guides, had learned an invaluable lesson. Earth's greatest defense lay not in advanced weapon systems or technological barriers, but in the natural forces that had shaped their world, and in the ancient wisdom of those who had learned to live in harmony with these forces. The desert returned to its timeless rhythms, unchanged by the brief intrusion of alien technology. It had stood as humanity's guardian, not through conscious action, but through the simple, immutable laws of nature that had governed it for millions of years. The aliens' retreat marked not just a military victory, but a profound demonstration of the power of natural forces over artificial advancement.